They gave me a number instead of a name the day they marched me onto Tarn Vosk, and for 6 years that number was all I answered to. Chain Gang, ash fields, the Reclamation Corps. We dug where the old empire had been buried by its own dying sky, clearing palaces nobody living had a right to, for a company that paid us in reduced sentences and burned lungs. I'd stolen grain during the famine year to keep my sister's children fed. That was the whole of my crime. It was enough. The antechamber we were opening that season had beaten 4 crews before mine. Grapple-lines snapped clean at the throat. Cutting torches guttered out a foot from the threshold like something had closed a hand over them. 2 men before us walked in fine and walked out, unable to say their own names for a week. The company logged it as structural instability and kept sending us back, because Ashworld contracts don't care what a hole in the ground does to a man, only whether it can be cleared. At the center of that chamber sat a throne carved from stone, so black it drank the work lights instead of throwing them back. Ash had sealed it to the dais in a shell as thick as a man's forearm, run down the armrests, filled every carved line until the whole thing looked like a shape dreaming under a gray blanket. Command wanted it broken apart and hauled out in pieces. 6 years on that world had taught me not to ask what a company wanted with a chair, and not to expect an answer. We worked in silence mostly. Overseer Bruck stood back from the stone itself. I noticed that before I noticed anything else about him, and let the gang go at it with picks and thermal lances, while he watched from the doorway like a man watching a fire he didn't trust to stay in its pit. My hands were the worst on the crew for this kind of work. Split and scarred from a childhood on a cane farm before the famine took the farm too. There's a stretch of scarring across both sets of my knuckles that never healed clean. Hard white ridges laid over each other like the marks were put there twice. The gang called it my brand. I'd stopped wondering about it before I was 10. The chamber fought us the way it had fought the others. Lances failed a hand's width from the dais. A grapple line took the arm off a man named Torvin when it recoiled. No one could say why, only that it did, all at once, like something had refused to be pulled. After that, the crew worked from the edges in, clearing what the throne would let us, and leaving the throne for later, the way you'd leave a sleeping animal alone, until you had no choice left. There was a woman on my crew named Sella, who'd been on Tarn Vosk longer than me, long enough to have opinions about the ground that the company never wanted. She used to say, the ash fields remembered things the way old men remember insults, not clearly, not kindly, but completely. She said it about the throne room specifically, the night after Torvin lost his arm, sitting across the mess bench with her hands wrapped around a cup of something that wasn't quite coffee. It's not broken instability, she said. Instability doesn't pick who it lets close. She looked at my hands then, the scarring drawing her eye before I could tuck them under the table. I gave her what I gave anyone who asked, a cane field accident, a bad run with a harvesting blade, and she let it go, because on Tarn Vosk, nobody pushed a man's past further than he offered it. But she kept looking a moment longer than she needed to, like she was reading a word in a language she almost knew. I was the one who ran out of choice. Near the end of a 14-hour shift, chest burning, I stopped to rest against the dais. Not to touch it, just to lean, the way a tired man leans on the nearest solid thing without thinking about what that thing is. My palm came down flat on the ash shell over the armrest. I felt the cold of it through the ash, and then, underneath the cold, something that was not cold at all. The shell cracked under my hand in a line no wider than a hair. I pulled back fast, the old convict reflex. Don't be the one holding the tool when something breaks. But the crack didn't stop at my hand's edge. It ran the length of the armrest, then branched, ash sloughing away in sheets like a held breath finally let go. Underneath, the black stone wasn't black at all. It was veined through with silver, and the veins were lighting, slow, the way a coal lights when you breathe on it. Bruck shouted for everyone back. Nobody moved. We stood there in a half circle, with our lances dead in our hands, and watched 6 years of buried dark, peel itself off a chair. The light ran down the armrest, to where my knuckles hung an inch from the stone, and stopped there. Not spread past me, stopped, like it was reading something. I looked down at my own hands because I didn't know where else to look, and for the first time, I understood what the scars actually were. Not a brand, not an old farm injury laid twice over careless work. A pattern, deliberate, matched ridge for ridge to the sigil now glowing along the throne's arm, the same shape worked into my skin generations before I was born, carried down through hands I'd never met, waiting for stone that had been waiting longer. "On your knees," Bruck said, but his voice had gone thin, and nobody in the crew moved to make me do it. The throne did not wait for either of us to decide. Ash broke from the whole seat at once, falling away from the high back, the carved rests, the wide black steps beneath it, until the thing stood clear in the worklight for the first time since before any empire I'd ever heard named had risen or fallen. It was larger than I'd let myself believe, and the silver in it did not flicker like fire. It burned the way a decision burns, steady, already made. Then it spoke, not from a mouth, because it had none, but from every vein of light at once, so the sound came from the stone itself, low and certain, the way ground might speak, if ground were certain of its own weight. "Ash blood, the throne remembers." Nobody in that chamber breathed for what felt like a long time. I didn't understand the words as words yet. I understood them the way you understand a hand closing gently around your wrist after a long fall. Recognition before meaning. Bruck found something like his voice. Remembers what? The light didn't answer him. It answered me, the way it had answered my hand. A pulse down the armrest, warm now instead of cold, tracing the scar pattern on my knuckles, like it was reading a name, written in a language only the two of us had ever known. I understood then what 6 years of chains had never told me plainly. My line hadn't ended in some famine ledger or cane field grave the way I'd always assumed. It had gone to ground, scattered into serf work and then convict labor, generation folding into generation, the sigil pressed into hands that never knew what they carried, until it came down to a man given a number instead of a name, who'd answered to it without complaint, because complaint had never once done a starving family any good. The throne hadn't refused every crew before mine out of hatred. It had refused them because none of them were what it was waiting for. I didn't feel like a king. There is a way of telling this that makes it sound like the ash lifted and a crown came with it, and that isn't what happened. What happened is that an ancient thing looked at the ugliest, most ordinary proof of who I was, the scars I'd hated my whole life, and told me it had been the truth the entire time. Bruck didn't put me back in chains that night. I don't know if it was fear of the throne or fear of what the company would do to a man who'd disobeyed a thing that could snap a grapple line like thread. Maybe even an overseer knows recognition when the ground itself delivers it. I still don't know what a throne wants from a convict, or what's left of the house it thinks it's restoring beyond one tired man with bad hands and a stolen sack of grain behind him. But I know this. I stood in that chamber with the light settled steady down my own arms, and for the first time since they gave me a number, I knew exactly whose name it should have been instead. Sella found me afterward, out past the work lights where the ash wind runs cold even in the day cycle. She didn't say anything clever. She just took my hand, turned it palm up, and traced the old scarring with one finger, like she was finally allowed to read it. "I knew," she said. "I didn't know I knew, but I knew." I asked her what I was supposed to do now. She didn't pretend to have an answer, which is the only reason I believed the rest, that a throne doesn't unmake 6 years of chains just by remembering your hands. It only means the chains were never the whole truth of you. The rest a man has to walk into on his own legs. I have not sat in it. Not yet. Some inheritances you have to earn the nerve for, even after the stone has already decided.